So hello everybody, welcome back to the Captain's Table with Nick Geringer, and I'm your co-host, David Benezra. And we have a special guest on for all basketball fans, but especially if you are a UCLA fan. We have Larry Farmer, who we are calling Coach today because he's done quite a bit of that and done it fairly well. And Larry also has a book, Role of a Lifetime, Larry Farmer and the UCLA Bruins, which is written by Larry Farmer with Tracy Dodds, with a foreword by Bill Walton and an afterword by Jamal Wilkes. It is listing at $27.95, published by Santa Monica Press. It came out on February 23rd and is available in hardcover on Amazon and as a Kindle offering. Did I get that right, Coach? Is there anything that's incorrect in there?
You got it all right.
Okay. Well, I also, of course, we were talking the other day, so I told you the truth. We moved to the West LA area, and I became a big-time Bruin fan, and you were right in my crosshairs as far as, we had moved in a little earlier, but I became really interested in basketball in 68, and you got there in 69, so that 69, 70 to 73 period, of course, you were a freshman. I want to talk about that for a second because freshmen didn't play back then, but that was right there. So you were at the peak of everything that happened. And then how many guys get the chance to be a great player at a school with that tradition and then become the head coach of their alma mater? And Nick has something in particular he wants to bring up about that. But let's start with something, let's go back to when you're younger. And I saw something in reading about you that I thought was very interesting. Well, a couple things. And the first thing is nobody ever has this written. It says self-taught player. So I want you to explain to me. I mean, I think I know what that means, but let's talk about that.
Right. Well, self-taught, what that really means in my case is I started playing a lot of pickup basketball and PE basketball throughout, elementary school and then junior high school. And the first time that I ever played on a team that actually had a coach and a system and an offense and a defense, I was actually a sophomore in high school, which when you think about it is very, very late, even back in those days.
Yeah.
A kid who wants to be a Division I college player. And so much of what I learned about the game of basketball leading into high school was, taught to me, in pickup games, 3-on-3 and 4-on-4 and, the schoolyard game.
Now this is, I got to cut you off for 1 second because that's particularly interesting to me because, so you had no organized ball until you get to high school, no structured basketball. And, growing up, I played a lot of pickup, so I know what you're talking about, but I'm thinking like that had to be I would say not difficult, like you can't do it, but a difficult transition. But actually, I'm thinking ahead to UCLA. So when I see you at UCLA, you look the opposite of that. Now, I know that's how Coach Wooden taught and everything, but still, you were fluid in that system of structure, like you'd been doing that for 10 years, not for a couple years or whatever. Like you'd had all that all your life. And so I think that's really, really interesting. And also, I think it says something about you because you're coming from a pickup background, which doesn't mean you're selfish, but pickup's totally different, right? And now you're fitting into a system, and I don't know, you'll have to tell me, but you looked happy in that system because, you were pretty good in that system. And a lot of guys around you that, most of them making sacrifices when, all of those guys were 20, 25, 30 point a game scorers, whatever, in high school. So that's what's really amazing to me. And I know this is long, but I'm going to get to a question here in a sec. So all that, but it says you nearly quit as a sophomore. So tell me about all that stuff.
Right. Well, see what happened when I got to high school, I decided to go to the best high school in the city because my desire was to somehow figure out a way to get a scholarship, to earn a scholarship. And I thought if I went to Manual High School, which was renowned at that time in Denver as one of the best, it was a great academic school, but one of the better basketball schools in the state, it'd be feast or famine. Either I'd make it or I wouldn't, but if I didn't make it, it would be at a great school. But going from only playing pickup basketball, I hadn't had any formal coaching. So I was actually a coach's dream because I didn't have enough bad habits to make me uncoachable. And I knew in order to play, I had to do exactly what the coaches told me to do because I'd never been coached before. So if a coach said, hey, you run to the elbow and then you pop out, free throw line extended, and you catch the ball 3 feet from the sideline and you make a reverse pivot, that's exactly what I did because I didn't know how to do it any other way. And so that made me a coach's dream because anything a coach told me to do on offense or defense, I was clay in his hands, and that's exactly, what I did. Now, the reason I almost quit during my sophomore year is my sophomore coach at Manual High School kept 15 players. And I was the number 15th guy on the team. And I knew that because, the first 8 or 9 guys got to pick what number they wanted to wear. Then the coach kind of handed out the next 4 or 5 jerseys. And then the last 2 guys, we kind of took what was left. And that pretty much tells you where you stand in the pecking order. But we played, I think the sophomore team played 20 games, and I got in about 10 of those games. And in 5 of those games, I made 1 basket.
Wow.
And I got so little playing time that I never even told my mother and father that I was playing basketball. They thought I was staying after school because I had ROTC.
That's great. That's a great story.
And so then you take that, and you were talking about you were a coach's dream. You then become a senior in your first team All-State, and you're all metropolitan, all city. You became that recruit, that player that people would look at and say, okay, this is a guy we want on our basketball team. What was that transition like for you when you recognized, wow, I'm starting to get the recognition. I'm starting to actually be able to do this sport, if you will, and do it rather well?
It was, to say the least, it was remarkable because I went, from not being a guy that got to play very much to a guy that was starting. And, when in the pickup game, I went from the guy that would never get picked to play. I had to wait until my turn to select the guys on the team. When you would play pickup basketball, I went from the guy that never got a chance to play to a guy that got picked every game. And so it was one of those transitions that it didn't go to my head because I knew how hard I had to work. And I knew, it was every day. It was get shots up. It was play as much as I could. A lot of the summer basketball in Colorado, where I grew up, there was no organized basketball. And so it was all pickup, street ball at a park, or somebody would open up a gym. And so oftentimes the better games, I was playing against college guys, grown men who we called them sidewalk alumni. They weren't good enough to play in college, but they were really good street players. And then we had the Denver Rockets, in the ABA. So we had Spencer Haywood, Ralph Simpson. There were guys that played in the ABA that would come to these open gyms. And so the competition level that I got a chance to play against really helped me develop. And that was a part of that transition that I made.
You had mentioned that you wanted to go to Manual High School because it was top quality basketball, and that was important to you. And then you step into UCLA, where they are literally 3-time national champions in a row. That was, I believe, Kareem's last year. The year before you came in, they had won 3 championships in a row, and so you step into UCLA. Was it the same mentality? I wanted to go to the best absolute school in reference to basketball that you could go to.
Really was. It was. I made that decision. It was the same premise. As a junior in high school, I watched UCLA play in what they still call the game of the century, and UCLA played Houston on national TV. They never had a game that was a regular season game on national television. before in the history of TV. This is, obviously before ESPN.
Right.
And I watched UCLA play Houston and lose. Houston had Elvin Hayes, and Elvin Hayes
Right.
had a crazy game. He was so good.
Right.
But there was something about sitting and watching UCLA play, and my heart right at that moment belonged to UCLA, and I didn't know how it was going to work out, but somehow I was going to go from that basement in Denver to play for UCLA. It had to happen. And I don't know how it happened, but it did.
Right. I remember Kareem had, I guess, a scratched retina in that game, and everyone remembers the game of the century, but they don't remember the rematch. And the rematch in San Diego, where I believe the Bruins won by some 30 points. And so
you guys smoked.
And so it was tremendous to actually remember that, going back into that. But let's talk about that, though. In stepping onto the UCLA campus, I know John Wooden already had the reputation of being such a tremendous coach. And one of the things that I remember people talking about is that one of the things that he would do is he would sit you down and show you how to put your socks on and how to tie your shoes. How crazy did you think that was when you first heard that?
Well, my freshman year, Coach Wooden had this saying, if you're on time, you're late. So everybody got to everything early. Well, the upperclassmen, we had the freshman rule at that time. We had 4 freshmen on scholarship. So we're having our first annual team meeting before the start of the season. So I assumed if I got over to where the meeting was going to be about 10 minutes early, I was going to be early. Well, little did I know that all the upperclassmen had gotten there 15 minutes earlier. So when the 4 freshmen, we walk in, the only place that we could sit was in the back of the conference room. So, we're back there, and, the guys that had been on the varsity before, Sidney Wicks, Steve Patterson, Curtis Rowe, I mean, these guys eventually are going to be all first-round draft choices. They're all sitting in the front. So Coach Wooden reads, the expectations of a UCLA basketball player. He's got it written on 2 sheets, what he expects of us in the classroom, what he expects of us during practice. Goes through this whole thing. Then he gets to the end of it, and he's standing behind a podium when he's delivering all this information. He gets to the end of it, and then I see the upperclassmen, everybody they sit up, and, their body language changes. And it's like, oh, well, Coach is getting ready to do it again. And so we can't see in the back of the room. So now all the freshmen, we've got to stand up. And Coach Wooden goes over and he sits down in a chair. And so now we're all standing up so we can see what he's doing. And he literally takes off his shoe and his socks, and he shows us how to put on your socks and your shoes. Now, you're talking about guys in this room are all, player of the year in their state. They're all great All-Americans. And our head basketball coach is showing us how to put on our socks and shoes. Now, this didn't just happen that year. It happened every year. And I remember when I got to be a senior, you kind of look around at the newbies, and, you smile because it's like, hey, you guys have no idea. You're about to see this every year that you put on that UCLA uniform. You will start the season out with Coach Wooden showing you the proper way to put on your shoes and socks.
Coach, I'm a funny guy. If I was a freshman in the room, I would seriously be thinking about, God, I hope he's not going to show me how to put a jock strap on. Because now nobody wears a jock, but back then you guys wore jocks, right? I mean, so yeah, yeah, it's a different mindset, isn't it?
What we learned as freshmen watching that was that there was not going to be any level of basketball, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom and on the court, that Coach Wooden wouldn't have meticulous control over, or there wouldn't be some fundamental attached to it, that there was a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, and we were going to do it the right way. As simple as that sounds, if you had come to a UCLA practice back in what they call the dynasty days, you probably would have gone to sleep because you would have watched us do the same drills over and over and over again. And you would say, oh, they did that drill yesterday. They did that drill 2 days ago. They seem to be doing, out of about 40 things, they're doing a combination of those 40 things every day. And yet Coach Wooden is finding little things wrong with what they're doing every day. And what would happen is those drills were as game-like as he could possibly get them, and they were chock full of fundamentals. It was being talented, but not making mistakes. And if you're talented and the other team's talented and you make fewer mistakes than they do, well, you give yourself the best opportunity to be successful. And that's how meticulous he was, all the way down to how to put your shoes and socks on.
Yeah, he left nothing to chance, right? I mean,
Nothing.
I understand. I understood some of that as far as, the repetition. He believed the practice did make perfect. And so, you did it and you did it a certain way. But I'm wondering, as players, and you're talented and you're winning, and I mean winning, how do you guys get up every day saying, oh, we're going to be doing this drill or a certain amount of these drills every single day and do them in a way that has energy and purpose? How are you able to focus, or is that coming also from coach and the staff? Because I believe you had Coach Crum hadn't gone to Louisville yet, right? When you were there, was he just
Correct.
going to Louisville? Okay. And you had Coach Cunningham and, oh my goodness, I forget the other coach's name.
Well, Frank Arnold came when Denny Crum, Denny left our junior year to go to Louisville.
Right. Okay.
And then Frank Arnold came.
So was it the coaches that were able to keep you guys up, or were you guys just so much like more mature considering the age, the day and all that you were able to pretty much come out and perform? Because I'm sure you guys were an excellent practice team.
You know what I learned the next year when I was a sophomore, and you referred to it earlier, David, because we had the freshman rule. It was the culture at UCLA. Now, certainly Coach Wooden was he was the engine that drove the train. But when I was a freshman, we did all the same drills that the varsity did. And we did them, to the best of our ability. When I got to the varsity side my sophomore year, we did the same drills, but we would have a simple drill like we're going to work on form rebounding. So each player is going to toss the ball off the backboard underhanded and jump up with two hands and then rebound it. Well, we had done that drill as a freshman. I get on the varsity side, and the first day we do this drill, Sidney Wicks, Curtis Rowe, their elbows are on the rim. So not only are we're going to do this drill and rebound it properly with two hands and jerk it in our chest, but everybody's going to go at game speed. So the guys that were the upperclassmen knew, because they had learned how to do that from Coach Wooden, but that had become the culture in the program. So the fact that we would do the same things over and over again, the competition level in practice was off the chain. Every day, my sophomore year, I was going up against arguably two of the best forwards in college basketball. And if I was going to make a dent and get any playing time, I had to prove to Coach Wooden that I was good enough to play against Sidney and Curtis. So there was a built-in competition
I'll say
level.
I'll say
that if you didn't bring it, then you proved to everybody, and certainly yourself, that you weren't good enough to be there. So the practices, the drills were repetitive, and to a certain degree, because they were fundamentally sound. The average fan might not think that he was seeing anything spectacular, but the fundamentals were becoming habits, and those habits were becoming the way we played. And again, when you'd watch our teams play on the weekends, we made fewer mistakes than the other team. We had great players, and oftentimes the scores were pretty lopsided.
I was as bad as anybody else. If I saw you guys make a turnover that wasn't like a great play by the defense, I was like very disappointed. Like, how could they turn it over? The Bruins never turn it over. What's wrong with that guy? And I was saying that to myself, not out loud. As an aside, by the way, you mentioned Sidney and Curtis, and I will fight to the death, because I believe that was, to me, the best forward tandem in the history of college basketball. Now, there's been a forward maybe better than either one of them, but I don't think you're going to find two guys starting on any college team that were as dominant as those two guys were.
We like to keep that argument in-house at UCLA. And so, you could say, Marcus Johnson, who was college
Richard
player
Washington.
Richard Washington.
Yeah.
You could say that.
I was thinking the same thing. And
oh, there, Tracy Murray. There's been some really good forward combinations,
Yeah,
but
there have been.
I got to see that one up close and personal, and they were both physical. They were tough. They could play both ends of the floor, and
Curtis played a lot taller than his height.
Oh yeah, and so did Steve Patterson. Steve Patterson was once referred to as who. He was like a Jeopardy question. Who was the center that started for UCLA on a national championship team that wasn't named Bill Walton or Lou Alcindor? Well, that was Steve Patterson.
Yeah, that's pretty nice to have him as a down year center,
Right.
isn't it? I mean,
And Dave Myers wasn't a bad ball player himself.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Forward position. So.
Coach, we're going to take a quick break. So we are talking with former UCLA great, former UCLA head coach Larry Farmer, and we're going to take a little break, and then we will come back to the captain's table. So, welcome back to the Captain's Table. We're talking with former UCLA great Larry Farmer. Coach Farmer has a book out, Role of a Lifetime, Larry Farmer and the UCLA Bruins, written by Larry Farmer with Tracy Dodds, has a foreword by Bill Walton and an afterword by Jamal Wilkes. Published by Santa Monica Press. It's been out less than a month. It came out on February 23rd. It lists for $27.95, and you can get it in hardcover on Amazon and also as a Kindle offering. So, Coach.
Coach, you are actually a player that played in the middle of a dynasty of 7 straight national championships. That's absolutely incredible. Growing up in Los Angeles, we obviously had the ability to see great basketball, so much so that USC football fans became UCLA basketball fans when basketball season came around.
Okay.
But you have the distinction of actually having the best winning percentage of a college basketball player. I believe it was 89-1. Let's talk about that one. What was that like for you guys?
We want to talk about that though, not in a bad way, but just I imagine like I was talking to Nick about this. We were talking before that you called in, and I said, if I'm playing on a team and we go 89-1, that one's going to really bother me. I would actually feel better being 88-2. Then it's like, okay, somebody else has to. But that one that one would be in my craw. No.
I believe it was national news when you guys lost. National news.
Was that the Notre? I'm trying to remember. Was that because I don't have it in front of me? Was that the Notre Dame game with Austin Carr and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that was the Austin Carr 46-point game.
Yeah, I was having a heart attack in a car listening to that saying, no, because it's on radio, right? You can't see it. And I'm hearing who the sub is, and I'm hearing what happens after the fact from the announcers, and I'm going, oh, no, why did he take that shot? Oh, God, why didn't we get it to so-and-so? Oh, God, Coach, what are you doing? How can you let Austin Carr just go off and just kill us? I was going nuts because I was so into the streak. It's like you guys had to be perfect, and you nearly were.
We really were. And I think when we went back to Notre Dame, Johnny D was the head coach then. I think we'd won 12 games in a row before that Notre Dame game. And then we lost that game. And it was the only time in the 3 years that I played at UCLA that I ever heard Coach Wooden come into the locker room and talk to a team after a loss. And I write about it in the book. It's pretty funny. You think about only having one loss. Well, that speech stuck with me because I only heard it one time. And then we finished the season. We had a lot of close games, but again, that was Sidney and Curtis. There was a lot of pressure on those guys to repeat. And I'll never forget the locker room. We won the national championship in the Astrodome. We beat Villanova, and I had never been on a championship team before. In high school, we lost the state championship game, so this was my first experience to be in a championship locker room. And as a sophomore, I went in the locker room and I started jumping up and down, and That's not the way UCLA celebrated.
Wow.
They had been there before, and so the guys were given skin and smiling, but there was no jumping up and down and screaming and yelling and doing all those things. And I didn't know that, but that year was really it was a coming out year for me, because that really taught me how champions conduct themselves. And then of course the next 2 years we went undefeated, and both years, and so that Notre Dame loss was in my sophomore year, and then the streak ended in South Bend, at 88. People get those games confused, because I've had a lot of people say, "Hey, was that one loss when the streak ended?" And no, when I left, we had won 75 in a row. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because that was Digger Phelps' Notre Dame team
exactly.
at that last one.
Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed the Villanova game too, because again, I was so into UCLA that I thought Howard Porter was a great college forward for Villanova, and I think the other kid was named Glover or something that was playing with him as the other forward, and people were making a big deal out of them, and I said, "Oh, are you kidding me? We got Batman and Robin. We got Sidney and Curtis. They're going to beat whatever Villanova has. Although I think those guys are good, but they're going to show the world that they're good." And that leads me to, since we're digressing just a hair here, Coach Wooden, he's the man in charge. You said, right? He's the train drive, the engine drives the train, the whole 9 yards. But so I want to check the veracity of this story with you. So you're playing Jacksonville, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Sydney is playing 3/4, I think, in the post on Artis Gilmore, 6'9" to 7'3", whatever Artis was.
He's fronting him.
He's fronting him. Okay, thank you.
Fronting him in the post.
Thank you. Not 3/4.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they're going over Sydney, I guess, a couple of times, and he scores, and there's a timeout. And this is what I heard at the timeout. And I heard two things. First, I heard no Peruvian player came into the timeout and started talking, because it's, you mentioned the culture. So the culture is we come to the bench, Coach Wooden's in charge. He's going to tell us whatever he needs to know. Nobody's talking. It's not a pro huddle. I heard that Sidney basically raised his hand politely and then said, "Coach, let me play behind him. If I play behind him, I can take care of this." And Coach Wooden said something like, "Okay, Sidney," or whatever. But there was I guess there was a little bit of a shock, surprise among players and coaches at that whole thing. And then Sidney goes out and he plays behind, and Artis turns to his right shoulder to put it up because he's left-handed from the left block, and Sidney goes up and blocks it. And Artis, I saw his body language. He was like shattered because nobody had done that to him. And here's a 6'8.5", 6'9" dude. And it turned the whole game around.
Right.
So I want to know about that huddle and that moment, and then how you thought Coach was about that and that whole thing. I think that's a fascinating bit of it's not, it shouldn't be called trivia. It's a fascinating little piece of information.
No, and that's a great story. And I was a freshman, so I was not at the game, but I certainly, when the varsity came back, that was the talk in the locker room, because what happened is we were behind at halftime. Because the strategy was Coach Wooden felt that, Sidney was not tall enough to play behind Artis. And so Jacksonville just kept throwing it over the top, and Artis would catch it and lay it in. And they had another 7-footer, Pembroke Burrows, on the other side.
Yeah.
So Sidney tells Coach Wooden that he can play behind Artis. He's going to be more effective. And Coach Wooden, being the ultimate motivator, told Sidney, "You can't play behind him, Sidney." Sidney said, "Yes, I can, Coach. I can play behind him." And so Coach Wooden, as he would tell the story, said he knew then that Sidney felt that he could guard him that way. And because Sidney felt so strongly about it, then Coach felt strongly about it. Coach Wooden would listen to his players. It wasn't like, it wasn't like he ran a dictatorship. I mean, it was one thing, we were going to do it his way. But he always listened to his players. And Sidney played, he got behind Artis. And he might have blocked 2 or 3. He might have goaltended 1 or 2. But every time Artis got the ball after that, Artis would catch it and look to see where Sidney was. And that turned the game around, and UCLA went on to win that championship.
It was so funny because it actually ruined my thinking of who Artis Gilmore was as a basketball player, because Sidney was so dominant in that second half in blocking shots and taking Artis out of his game, that I really thought that Artis Gilmore was not a great player. And then of course he went on to the ABA and played incredibly well. And Sidney Wicks was my hero.
But Artis was so shattered. What a lot of people, of course, I pay attention to little stuff. It fascinates me. So near the end of the game, I think you guys maybe had a 3-possession lead, and we're at a minute or whatever we have, and Artis turns, and Curtis Rowe came off the weak side and just volleyballed it like 10, 12 feet out the baseline, and that was like, he was broken. He was completely – I actually at that point, when I saw his second time body language now after Curtis got him, I felt bad for him. Because there was something about Jacksonville. They were sort of like not the good guys. Like, I really didn't like them. It wasn't like other teams the Bruins had played in big games. So, yeah, I was really, we got to beat these guys. And when early on, like you were talking about, Coach, it didn't look good because they're going over the top and he's scoring, I'm sitting there saying, oh, this is going to be a long day because it doesn't look like we're adjusting right away. But then the second half came, and like you said, they made the adjustment. But then Curtis, put the cherry on top at the end with that statement. I mean, I think Curtis was about 6'3.5", listed at 6'5", playing like 6'8", and he played all of 6'8" plus on that play. He just came over and jumped out of the gym, probably had his armpit over the rim and just threw it out of there. Whoa, what a play,
Yeah. UCLA had a way through the years of finishing, and that's one of the things that Coach Wooden's teams did. If we got you on the ropes, then there was no letting you back in the game. That only happened once during my 3 years on the varsity. But once we got you on the ropes, then it was not, the game was going to be over. But now it was just a matter of, what your deficit was going to be, because there was never any let up.
Now, following that, you had this big redhead that came in and played basketball, a gentleman by the name of Bill Walton, I believe.
Yeah, that guy.
When he stepped on campus, did you actually understand just how great a basketball player he would be as well?
Because he's sort of a funny-looking guy, right? I mean, body-wise and all that at 18.
Tall and gangly.
Yeah.
And, he played freshman basketball. And so, I'm a sophomore on the varsity now. And so I'm catching glimpses of this freshman team. And I'm watching this guy, he's quick, he's agile. He moves, he gets off his feet quickly. He's fundamentally sound. He's just doing things that, we're hearing these rumors about, hey, this guy could be as good as that, Abdul-Jabbar fella. Wait a minute. Now that's royalty you're talking about now. And you're comparing this freshman to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Wait a minute now, not so fast. And then that following year, when he was a sophomore and I was on the court with him, that very first week of practice, then it was like, oh, this guy is really, really good.
I remember seeing him at the beginning of a basketball game prior to the tip-off, and he always looked like he had to go to the bathroom. He was jumping around all the time. He was so anxious to get out on the court. But I was so incredibly amazed at how well you guys played as a team. I mean, it was just unbelievable, some of the things that was being done. And so
yes, and I described to you how that 71 team, how we won the championship in the Astrodome against Villanova,
right?
And how the locker room was a little bit more subdued. Well, that was a senior-laden team. And that following year when, Walton and Wilkes and Lee and all those guys, they're sophomores. So now there was an injection of youth. And, Bill was one of these guys, he'd get himself psyched up and he couldn't keep still before games.
Right.
And then he'd block 80 shots and get every rebound and start the fast break. And, So there was a youthful enthusiasm, and the character of this team was different. Our upperclassman was only Henry Bibby. Out of the starters, we only had one senior. Everybody else was an underclassman. And so there was a different feeling in the locker room. There was still pressure, it was still UCLA, and
right.
But the expectation was different because people didn't know exactly what they were going to witness. And boy, did they find out pretty quick.
I remember watching a TV show in which they were talking about the greatest basketball teams of all time. And I almost threw my cell phone at the TV because I got so angry. But they had Indiana as the top team, and they said the difference in why they had Indiana as the greatest team ever was in Bobby Knight being the difference maker as the coach. And that literally just was like blasphemous to me. As great a coach as Bobby Knight is, and don't get me wrong, obviously he was a great coach and knew X's and O's, but you just can't say that against the greatest coach that ever lived, in my estimation, in John Wooden. And so as far as teams that you've played on, who would you say was the best UCLA basketball team?
And see, again, and I don't want you guys to take this the wrong way, but we at UCLA like to keep that argument in-house.
Oh, okay. Another.
Not going to cross that.
Another on the.
Not going to step into that landmine, are you?
Yeah. Whoa.
We usually get down to about 6th or 7th before we bring any team that's on the outside. That's probably when we get to that
right.
Indiana team.
Right.
But let me just say this. If you're going to, let's say we're going to measure all the great college teams of all time. And so maybe that first measuring stick that we use is, okay, in order to be in the conversation, you have to be undefeated. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair.
Okay.
Good
starting
point. That whittles it down quite a bit. You have to be undefeated to be in this conversation. And then how did you dominate your competition? Were all your games close, or were none of your games close?
Oh, I know where this is going, because I remember one of the Walton era teams, I think their average margin of victory was 30.3 or something like that.
Yes.
30.3 points per game. Now, not only do you go undefeated, but your average win margin is 30.3 points per game, which 51 years later is still a record. Now, let me tell you what's amazing about that. The next year, 73, we go undefeated again. Okay, there's no three-point line. There's no shot clock. Teams are holding the ball against us. In 72, out of our 30 games, 12 of them, we scored over 100 points. There's no three-point line. People are trying to hold the ball. So the next year, our average win margin is 21.2 points per game. So we go from 30 down to 21. And one of Kareem's teams, I think they were 24. I think the Bobby Knight team that you're referring to, you can check statistically, I think they were like 19 points per game. Mm-hmm. So if you want to use that as a measuring stick, did you win every game, and were you dominant? I don't know how you could put any team in front of the 72 Bruins.
They were hating. That's all.
You just made your point, Coach. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back. We're talking with Larry Farmer, and we're talking about UCLA when they were a dynasty, and we're about to get more to Coach himself when we come back from break at the captain's table. So welcome back to the Captain's Table. After we've just had a short break, we're talking with Coach Larry Farmer, former UCLA great. And Coach has a book out, Role of a Lifetime, Larry Farmer and the UCLA Bruins, written by Larry Farmer with Tracy Dodds, a foreword by Bill Walton, and an afterword by Jamal Wilkes. And an aside here, naturally, Bill Walton would have the foreword and not the afterword. Anyways, list price of $27.95, published by Santa Monica Press. It came out in late February, and it is available in hardcover on Amazon and also as a Kindle offering. So I want to ask you one question before we move on to other stuff that I think is of good question. Of course, it's my question, but all the guys, and I mentioned this briefly before, so all these talented guys are coming into UCLA. Was it a shock for you at UCLA? Not the level of the competition, your teammates, anything like that, but just that maybe you had to button it down a little bit. You couldn't quite play like you played in high school, and I'm sure some guys maybe felt a little restrained, like I could have done a little bit more, I could have showed a little bit more. Now, I think culture-wise, that all worked out, obviously, with the winning, but just you personally, did you ever feel like I'd like to do more, but this is sort of how we play and how Coach wants me to play and the things he has me doing, et cetera, et cetera? Just can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that was the premise of why I titled the book Role of a Lifetime. There are no great teams in any sport that are without super players, superstars, and then other players that are role players. You look at the great Celtics teams, the great Warrior teams, the great Laker teams, and you can name the superstars, and you can also name the guys that game in and game out had to perform whatever their role was to the best of their ability. They had to be a star in their role in order for that team to be successful. The first thing I learned at UCLA as a sophomore was that if I wasn't willing to do my role, and Coach Wooden was very clear on what your role was, that there was another high school All-American behind me that would be more than happy to get that 5 or 6 or 7 minutes that I was squawking about because I thought maybe I ought to be shooting the ball more. And Coach put that guy in, and that guy would come in and do exactly what Coach Wooden want, and there UCLA would go. And so that was one of the masterful things about Coach Wooden. It was figuring out what he needed you to do for that team to be a good team, and then convincing you that if you did your job, you not only would get rewarded with playing time, but your playing time would then help the team be successful. So I don't think there was, Bill likes to say, and I love Bill Walton. Bill loves to say that, when he got to UCLA, he didn't have to sacrifice. Everybody else kind of had to sacrifice for him. And that's Bill being humble. Bill was a great player, but there were things that Bill wasn't allowed to do at UCLA that had he gone to a different school, he could have done a lot more. I mean, you think about one of the things that Bill is renowned for, rebounding his outlet pass. Well, that outlet pass meant that we were fast breaking, which meant that his opportunities to score were lessened because he was on the other end of the floor starting the break.
Yeah.
Centers today would get the rebound and they'll call that point guard back and they'll throw it to the point guard. Point guard will walk it up the floor. Then that center sprints down the court and gets in position. And so now he becomes more of a focal point of the offense. So we all had to sacrifice in different ways. But it was your willingness to understand your role. It was your willingness to do it. And then in my case, it was understanding that if I didn't do my role, somebody else would do it. And so I had to be the best at doing what I was required to do, and that's why I played, and that's why I started.
You had tremendous stats on the freshman team. You were 21-plus and 10-plus, I think, points and rebounds. And now, of course, all those freshmen are talented. Now you're coming up, talented sophomores with the guys that are up there. And just did you ever have a moment where it's like almost like you want, well, maybe not because it's Coach Wooden, but did you ever have a moment where you wanted to go into Coach Wooden's office, knock on his door and say, hey, Coach, can I come in and talk with you for a moment and say, Coach, I love everything we're doing, but, I'd like to be able to ISO a little bit more, or can I go off the dribble a little bit more? Do I have to make a ball reversal? Do I have to go inside? Wasn't there ever a moment, you're normal as a young man, right? I mean, ego is a good part of the game, or it can be a bad part, but you need a good, healthy ego. So you guys are all subduing it a little bit, but still under the surface, you got to be thinking, the only thing that to me is really keeping it together, well, there's three things. There's Coach Wooden. He's recruiting guys that I'm assuming have pretty good character
yes,
to buy in, but he's already won when you got there. Starting that 63, the Hazard Goodrich years. So he's built that foundation, and you're coming in. I'm wondering how much that would work if, say, it's Coach Wooden. He's as great as ever, but for some reason they're 500 or they're winning 19 or 20 games a year, losing 12. I don't know if that goes over as well, as great as he is, as talented as you guys were, and even as high character as you were. So there's just human beings, right? I mean, that's what I'm thinking. So don't tell any tales out of school. Yeah, don't tell any tales out of school, but there's got to be some of that.
We'll never know. We'll never know about that.
Okay. We'll keep
no 500 teams.
Yeah, we'll keep that on. We'll keep that whole thing on the down low. So that's on the down low list. Okay, I got you. I got you.
Now, Coach, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, here's something that really in those days kind of flew under the radar because of social media not being what it is today. Because we had the freshman, programs in football and basketball, there were times where you could have 21, 22, guys on scholarship for basketball. There were 4 freshmen the year I came in. There were 7 freshmen the following year in Walton's class. And so we had guys that were good enough to start on other college teams that they were redshirting at UCLA. They weren't getting minutes. And so every year we had guys transfer. They saw the handwriting on the wall that, the way they wanted to play or the way that they felt they could play wasn't going to happen for them at UCLA. And so, again, we had a lot of guys transfer. We had guys transfer every year. 2 of the 4 freshmen that I came in with transferred. And then Tommy Curtis, of course, redshirted. The other thing that happened is we had 6 weeks of practice before we play our first game. And we had probably 15 managers. And the managers kept stats during our practices, just like statisticians would during a game. And so after every practice and every scrimmage and every day, the stats would be posted individually, forwards, guards, centers, and then they would be posted cumulatively. So to answer your question, David, when you said, would you ever feel like going in and saying, Coach, I want to run some ISOs? I could go up and look at the stats after the first week, and I could see Sidney Wicks' stats and Curtis Rowe's stats and John Ecker's stats. Then I could see my stats. And when looking at my stats compared to those other guys, that was going to very much limit my conversation with Coach Wood. It would have been a very short conversation.
Well, what's interesting is that you were talking about the competition. It would seem that your practices or your scrimmages would actually be tougher games than the games you would actually play in season.
They were oftentimes exactly that way. Swin Nader, who never started a game at UCLA, was our backup center, 7 foot. He would be perfect in today's game because very skilled, pick and pop, 15 to 18 foot jump shooter. And Bill Walton said one day when asked who was the toughest guy he had played against all season, Bill Walton, College Player of the Year. Bill said the toughest player that I play against all season is Swin Nader, who I play against every day in practice. Well, Swin Nader was a first-round NBA draft choice and had a 12 or 14-year NBA career. Some of the best plays that I ever saw during my college career were not in the games. They were actually in practice. And when we played on the weekends, we had not seen anything differently as far as competition than we saw in those 2.5 hours that we experienced every day during the practice.
Worked out pretty good for Sven, because what I heard way back when was, when things were different, that, I don't know if this is true. It sounds kind of crazy, but then not so crazy, was that UCLA didn't want to go against Sven Nader, who I guess could have maybe gone to Washington State or one of the Northwest schools in the Pac-12. And so they took him knowing we've got Bill. He's not playing. We're not playing both big guys. We're not going Twin Towers out here with these guys. And they didn't want him to go there. But then if you look at it as a career decision, just like Bill saying Sven Nader is challenging me every day. Well, he's playing against Walton every day and all these other athletic guys. And like you said, he goes to the NBA.
Right. I remember the story, and this may be fable, so forgive me if it is, but I remember the story growing up is that Bill Walton was playing in a game and he was getting beat up. They were literally just bruising him. And John Wooden had enough and said, okay, Walton, come out, Nader, go in. And Swin proceeded to use his strength and might to beat up on some folks. So was that a true story or did I make that up?
No. That is true. I'm going to answer that in two parts. Coach would not have recruited Swin out of fear. We don't want to play against this guy because, after all, we still had Bill.
Right.
Okay.
But Swin played at Cypress Junior College, and the head coach at Cypress was a former UCLA
Don Johnson.
Player. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there was more of that that led to Swin coming. And Swin was he wasn't a very experienced player. He's just very skilled. And so he improved greatly by coming to UCLA and then playing. We had two tough guys that you would not even want to mess with to this day. And that was Swin Nader and Larry Hollifield. Larry was from, Compton, and they hadn't lost a game in his 3 years at Compton High School. And then he went to the Compton JC, and they didn't lose a game there. So he came in with a tremendous winning record, a great player. But Holly had that Compton toughness. And so when we played at Notre Dame, and Digger had his guys out being real physical, and, they were in our face, and the fans were, and it was just kind of a nasty atmosphere. Well, to settle things down, being the gentleman that Coach was, he put in Swin and Holly and said, Coach Phelps, if you want to play a little edgy, I got a couple guys here play a little edgy. And that calmed things down. Everything got right back to normal the way it was supposed to be. But yeah, those two guys were our tough guys. They were enforced. You didn't want to mess with either one of them.
Yeah, Digger was pretty brash, and of all the coaches that UCLA faced, I really disliked him when he was at Notre Dame facing UCLA. He was smart. He was like a hype guy before anybody used that word. He was hyping it up. He was going to build up Notre Dame basketball, which had been good under Johnny D, but he wanted to bring it up that much more because of the football. And he brought sort of a high profile thing to that job and did elevate the program. And he wore those horrible looking jackets that were flashy, the check jackets, all this stuff that he wore. But I just thought, I knew what he was doing, but I still thought, he's just an abrasive, rude, sort of almost classless guy with these statements he's making. And that became the big game to me, bigger than beating USC. And, even though Bill Boyd was a good coach and they ran the stall on you and I think won 46-44 against UCLA one year. That might have been Sydney's year. Or it might have been Kareem's year. I can't remember.
It was Kareem's year.
Yeah, they had Bill Hewitt and those guys. But it was Digger. He was the villain. He was the villain.
When Digger had Orlando Woolridge, Kelly Tripucka, and Bill Lambier, that was an NBA front line. That was the year he had those guys. They went to the Final Four. And if you go back through UCLA statistics, he was the only coach, Richard Digger Phelps, that had beaten UCLA like 4 straight times in Pauley. There was a segment in there starting with Coach Bartow and then ending with Coach Brown where, there was, we kind of put them on the map and then they kind of got the upper hand on us, in that one-on-one stuff where they were beating us more than we were beating them. But he had some great teams, and certainly that front line I just named to you, all those guys played a long time in the NBA.
So, Coach, I want to bring in your coaching experience before it gets too late in this. So, in 1975, it's obviously John Wooden's last year. He's won with a guard-oriented offense, a forward-oriented offense, a center-oriented offense. I don't know what else you could ask of the guy. But in 1975, it's his last year. You are assistant coach under John Wooden, and you go out and win the national championship in that very last year. What was it like to see John Wooden go?
Now, his last year, when he won the national championship and then retired, I was playing professional basketball in Europe.
Oh, okay.
I had been, I was on the staff the year before
Mm,
when we lost to North Carolina State. And, but I was playing professional basketball in Europe.
got you.
And when I heard that coach was retiring, I was brokenhearted
Mm.
because, I had grown to love him, and I knew with his retirement was going to be the end of our dynasty. Um, it was it was a very emotional time for me to hear that he was going to step down. Now, little did I know that his replacement, Coach Bartow, was going to hire me as a full-time assistant.
Mm.
And so my being very sad about Coach retiring, that meant a lot to me. But then, that dynasty that I was a part of, the very next year, all of a sudden, the staff that I'm on is being compared to the Frankenstein monster that I had been a part of creating.
So you go through Bartow, and then
Uh-huh.
I believe it's Cunningham that
Yes.
replaces Bartow, and then
Yes.
Larry Brown, and you're on all three of these staffs. And
Yes.
then you finally get the opportunity, and UCLA was known as a trailblazer in reference to having successful African Americans in various fields, from Jackie Robinson in baseball to Kenny Washington in football, having Rayford Johnson and Arthur Ashe and Ralph Bunch, and the list goes on and on. And I remember as a young black kid growing up here in Los Angeles, and I hear that Larry Farmer is the new UCLA basketball coach, and the joy, the absolute celebration that I had that a person like Larry Farmer was now the head coach of the preeminent college basketball team in the nation. That was so thrilling to me as a young black man growing up. Did you feel the pressure of that when you were actually named head coach?
I felt the significance of it.
Okay,
There was going to be pressure because it was UCLA,
right.
and again because I was a part of all of those teams. I was well aware of that. My mentors as a young assistant coach of color were guys like Freddie Snowden, who was at Arizona, John Thompson at Georgetown, George Raveling, John Chaney at Temple. And these guys were trailblazers, but they were all given programs that were in the cellar.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I am the first young African-American coach that's not given a team that has no history or no tradition or is in the bottom. But this team has been one of the best of all time.
Right.
And what was even more surprising to me, and it's still to this day, is I remember as a high school senior going into Coach Wooden's office and sitting there for the first time and being nervous. I'm meeting Coach Wooden, and I'm in his office, and he's offering me jelly beans. I'm in Coach Wooden's office, and one wall is nothing but Sports Illustrated covers, and I'm 18 years old. And 12 years later, I am a 30-year-old, wet behind the ears assistant coach, and I've just been named the head coach at UCLA.
Wow.
12 years after that recruiting visit, that office that I was in that was Coach Wooden's was now mine. And I tell you, every time I say that, I get goosebumps because it was that unreal to me.
I still feel those goosebumps myself. So.
Hey, I want to ask you one thing now. You were an assistant coach from 1973 to 1981 at UCLA, but it was interrupted. You went over to Germany to play. Now, that's interesting to me. Usually a guy finishes playing college ball, he goes to Europe. If he wants to coach, he comes back. You were coaching, and it's like you took a sabbatical, and you said, you know what, I feel like I still want to play, and you go over to Germany, and then I guess it was just a year, almost like, okay, I did that, I traveled, I got to play some pro ball overseas. It's great, but you know what? Now I want to be back. What's the whole thing with that?
You got it exactly right. I graduated from UCLA. We'd won 75 games in a row, and I got cut by the Cleveland Cavaliers. I was drafted by the Cavaliers and the Denver Rockets. I made it all the way through a rookie camp and veteran camp and exhibition season. And the day that they started paying, I got cut on Saturday. And Monday, I was the graduate assistant on Coach Wooden's staff. And so I had that year to learn about teaching basketball from being on Coach Wooden's staff. But being around basketball, I knew that I wasn't finished playing. I had to get playing out of my system. Now, I was hoping that might be, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years. But I went to Europe and played. And what was remarkable about it was when Coach Bartow replaced Coach Wooden, one of the stipulations that he had for the other coaching position on his staff was he wanted a former UCLA player of recent that had coaching experience. And although I fit the bill, I was a recent Coach Wooden player, I only had 1 year of coaching experience. Wow. And for him, that fit what he was looking for perfectly. So my getting away and playing out of my system was great for me. But having that 1 year of not playing pro ball but being on Coach Wooden's staff led to, what would be a 44-year coaching career.
Wow. Yeah, how true. And we're going to take a break. We're talking with Larry Farmer, former UCLA great. And we'll be right back, and we'll come back to the captain's table and talk some more with Coach Farmer. Welcome back to the captain's table. We've been chatting with Larry Farmer, and I wish we had 2 hours for Coach. He has a book out, Role of a Lifetime, Larry Farmer and the UCLA Bruins, written by Larry Farmer with Tracy Dodds. It has a foreword by Bill Walton and also an afterword by Jamal Wilkes. Published by Santa Monica Press, it came out on February 23rd. It is available in hardcover on Amazon for a list price of $27.95 and also as a Kindle offering. So, Coach, I can't help it. It's everything is UCLA. And, UCLA had a couple of famous supporters, Sam Gilbert and his wife, Rose Gilbert. And I just wanted to ask you, obviously you must have had some contact with them, and what type of impact and what type of experience you had, especially coming from out of state. The only guys are going to be your new teammates and all that. So you're in a foreign land in a sense, so new environment. So can you extrapolate on that a little bit?
Yes. I can start at the end of the story, which would probably then tell you a lot about my relationship with Sam and Rose. I grew up in Denver, and so on senior day at UCLA, my folks could not afford to come out to California. And then, of course, we kind of anticipated that we would be going to play for the national championship. And so my parents kind of geared their financial well-being toward making sure they were going to be in St. Louis. And so at UCLA on senior day, because my parents couldn't be there to support me and walk out to half court and, go through the senior ceremony, I was close enough to both Sam and Rose that they were the two stand-ins for my mother and father, and those two accompanied me on senior day. So that's why the reason I started there with the story is that's how close I was to the two of them, and that they would be the stand-in for my parents on senior day. But I had a very, very warm and friendly relationship with both Sam and Rose. They were like a second set of parents to me, literally and figuratively. I write about my relationship with both of them in the book. When you are as powerful and as visible a figure as Sam was, you're going to have people that love you and you're going to have people that hate you. And he certainly has people on both sides. And as his story has been told at UCLA, and his relationship with a lot of the players, there have been good and bad stories told about him. The reason I mentioned him in my book is because my relationship with him was a very positive one. I came from a very close-knit family in Denver. My dad was a staff sergeant in the military, so the home that I grew up in was not a democracy. What my father said was the rule. UCLA was very similar in atmosphere with Coach Wooden. We did what Coach Wooden wanted us to do. And Sam was one of the people in my life who, although he was very, very much a disciplinarian in the way he conducted his life and his business, out of the relationships that I had with those other, my dad and Coach, he was the only one that really had a choice. Coach Wooden picked me to play there. And so, that was his decision. But there were certain rules that went along with that. And my dad was my father. And so there was a certain responsibility that went along with that. But, Sam really had a choice, and he chose to befriend me. And so we had quite a wonderful relationship. I actually gave, when he passed away, I gave the eulogy at his service. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually heard that, despite all the other things you alluded to, that they were, very caring, very supportive. I heard they had a lot of, I guess, Sunday brunches or whatever. And, even though you were UCLA players, and again, this will have to be on the down low now, you're probably going down to that drugstore on Westwood, in the Westwood Village there on Westwood Boulevard, and probably getting free food there and free food other places. You're college guys, and you needed meals, right? Yeah. So
What?
No, it never happened. What are you talking
Never
about?
happened.
Yeah.
No.
going and getting
Johnson's on the corner down there on Westwood Boulevard.
going to Stan's Corner Donut Shop when it was still there, and probably getting a dozen from that guy. But you needed food was
That's
big.
funny.
Food was big, and so I'm sure that it was the camaraderie, and also it's a nice meal and all that type of thing that they did. And Rose was a teacher.
Yes.
And I understand that, she was also, it was different than it is today. And the athletic departments weren't set up the same way. So she was very supportive academically of the players as well.
No, not in that way. Where Rose was an AP English teacher.
Okay.
And so at Pacific Palisades High School.
Right.
And so a lot of the conversations that might go on around a Sunday brunch would be about academics, and it would be more along the lines of how hard are you working in school? Are you putting value on your education? They were more of life lessons. They were not, hey, I'm going to help you write your history paper.
Gotcha.
Rose was always too busy doing her own thing. And here's the one point that I really want to make. Because there are a lot of times where it takes, sometimes life has to catch up with, life doesn't evolve as fast as the necessity to evolve. And when you look back at the way the NCAA was running things back in the 60s and 70s, and then you look at how things are being run now with name, image, and likeness, it really became known to the NCAA that books, fees, and tuition for kids that were coming from out of state, like I was coming from out of state, and you move from Colorado to Los Angeles, there's a huge difference there. And when you come from a close-knit family like I did, and you stick a guy that had a 12 o'clock curfew in the city of Los Angeles, there's a need to have other supervision, to have other people around you that care about you. And for me, not only was that Coach Wooden, but then that became Sam and Rose. They were people that would question me about how hard I was working in school, if I was doing the right thing in between practices. They were holding me accountable. And I needed that, again, coming from a very disciplined family. And so they held and still hold a very special place in my life, because I needed a family support emotionally, and that's what they gave me.
So then let's jump to your being the UCLA head coach, and you've got a nice record. You won .726. So basically you won 73% of your games, but unfortunately it's UCLA too close to the Wooden era. So how did you handle that? Because there had to be a lot of grumbling. And normally a guy that's winning 73% of his games would have a lot longer to be able to maybe win 80% of his games or what have you, But at UCLA, the clock was different, wasn't it?
Well, what, and I explained that in the book because a lot of people wanted to know why I walked away from a contract extension, and it was a little bit unclear to a lot of people because I was given a 2-year contract extension, had a press conference, and then a few days later, I resigned, and you're going to have to get the book to get the full story of that, but.
Give me a taste. an appetizer. Something I can chew on a little bit.
Well, at the end of the book, I put down the records of every coach up until Coach Cronin, who's currently there, how many years they were at UCLA and their win-loss percentage. And Gary Cunningham was there for 2 years, but he has the highest win-loss percentage. He's up in the 80s. And then Coach Bartow's way up there, too. He was there for 2 years. And I'm right in the middle of the pack. I think I'm a little bit ahead of Coach Brown, a little bit behind Coach Herrick. And Coach Herrick is the only other guy to hang a banner in Pauley Pavilion for winning a national championship. And so I wasn't the best, I wasn't the worst, but I'm somewhere in the middle. But my reasons for leaving had nothing to do with the pressures of being the head coach at UCLA, because again, I knew that from being a player and some of the unrealistic expectations. And I certainly got to see it firsthand by being on Coach Bartow's staff. Coach Bartow went 52-9. I want you to think about that in 2 years. 52-9, and 2 of those 9 losses were to that 75 Indiana team.
Right.
So 52-9, and in most places they're building a statue out in front of the arena, and
they wanted to burn him in effigy, if I recall.
Right.
It was pretty bad because I think it was going to be a no-win situation following Coach Wooden anyway.
Yeah. Well, the reason I touched on that was Coach Wooden had alluded to the fact that he didn't say it directly like this, but basically it wasn't fun anymore. The pressure, he didn't feel pressure as far as he knew how to do his job. He was secure mentally, all that type of thing, his confidence and his approach. But he wasn't enjoying how basically the people around the program were responding to, oh, they only beat them by 10. Oh, they almost lost. Oh, this UCLA team is, and they're comparing all the teams. This team, I mean, we're doing it in the show because it's interesting, but they're comparing the team and saying, oh, this 75 team isn't much. And, to me, I hated to see him go also. I really did. But then it was like I had an epiphany. It was like a few months later, everything had calmed down. I thought about it. I said, good for you, Coach. You went out a winner on your own terms. You had enough. You don't need to do anything more. Enjoy life. Just you about back off from it.
We were so spoiled as UCLA fans. Coach Farmer, you went 89-1. We thought that was just going to continue.
Yeah.
On and on.
That wasn't the gold standard.
Right.
It was the standard.
Right. Yeah. And so 89-1, you lose one basketball game, and it's the lead story on the evening news, the national evening news, by the way. And so. And so UCLA basketball fans were truly spoiled. And I think even at the end of John Wooden's career, there were people who started to criticize John Wooden. It was unbelievable that you could actually criticize a guy who won 10 national championships in 12 years.
I think you're right about that. I think people
Yes.
people were thinking that Coach Wooden all of a sudden, because it was looking a little tighter in these games, had lost it somehow.
Yeah.
That he was too old. That it was like whatever. Crazy stuff.
And I remember the game against Louisville where I was like, oh, you got to win it. And Richard Washington hit the jumper, and literally I jumped out of my seat, touched the ceiling, and I'm no athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I could have dunked a basketball that day as a young kid.
Oh, that was a huge shot.
That
was a huge shot.
Oh,
yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah. You know what people forget? My senior year, 1973, Coach Wooden actually missed 2 basketball games because he had suffered a mild heart attack. And, Coach, in typical Coach Wooden fashion, we had won Friday and Saturday. And then Coach had the chest pains on like Sunday and was admitted to the hospital. So if there was ever a convenient time to have a heart attack, he had it right after games. So he only missed the next weekend. And then the following week, he was back on the bench. As a matter of fact, he missed 2 games. And then the following weekend, they awarded him the Sportsman of the Year award. You remember the award that
Right.
Sports Illustrated would give out.
Right.
Boy, I had forgotten that. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Yes. And so he had some health issues that might have played a role in him deciding, that it was time for him to retire. I interviewed other coaches about, like Gary Cunningham. I talked to him, Lee Hunt, because Coach Bartow, God rest his soul, had passed away. But Lee Hunt had been with Coach Bartow at Memphis State and then at UCLA. And that was pretty much the consensus. Coach Brown left UCLA for different reasons. He, was going to make a fortune at New Jersey with the Nets. But the other coaches all kind of left because they said it wasn't fun. But here's my feeling, and I believe this to this day about UCLA. If you want to play at UCLA, if you want to coach at UCLA, you're going to be measured by a different yardstick. The young men that are currently on the UCLA team, they're part of a unique brotherhood because they play and practice underneath those 11 banners every single day. And they know however many years have passed since Coach Wooden won his last championship, there's still that spark. There's still those 4 letters, and everybody expects more, including me. I'm a former player. I'm an alumni. We expect more out of a kid that will take that responsibility, and it takes more courage to know that when you play for UCLA, there's going to be a lot more expected of you than maybe if you went to another university. If you lose, people are going to storm the court. If you get to the second or third round of the NCAA tournament, people are going to be disappointed. What might be a distraction or deterrent for some people is, in my opinion, it's still what separates UCLA from other schools, and that's what makes us great, is because more is expected.
Well said. Well said. I got to say, this is probably another on the down low question from me. But your generation, pre-3-point line and all that. Now, I don't know if I told you this in our talk before, but I felt that was the best era of basketball as far as style of play and everything else that went with it, and how the kids, you were young men, how the kids handled themselves and played, and more teamwork and all that. Do you guys, you go to a Bruin game, and I'm not saying it's just the Bruin team, but you're watching a game, and it's like, it's got to be a little difficult to watch, even though we know there's always change. The game's always changing. It's always moving forward into, some other area, some other direction. And some of that's good, but you got to be watching it and maybe saying to yourself, oh, Coach Wooden would have never allowed that. This would never have happened under Coach's watch. What is that kid thinking about? And how come Coach Cronin isn't pulling this kid out of the game for that right now? Whatever, lack of effort or whatever you perceive it to be. There's got to be some of that because, like I used that term with you, smooth mechanics. You guys were so fundamentally sound. When you talk about fundamentals today, it's almost like a whole different set of fundamentals people are talking about. I mean, then you were fundamentally sound, but yet, of course, you guys could make plays, and you integrated the two things beautifully. So it was a beautiful style of basketball to watch, the fluidity of it. That's what I like about good basketball. And today's game, even though we have all these talented guys and there's more athletes running around, it's choppy to me. It's not like a fluid, beautiful, some sort of ballet performance. It's different. It's just guys feeling, I got this, coach. And if it goes, great. And if it doesn't, and nobody wants to say anything, because then the reputation will get around that, a kid, will say, I can't play for this guy. He doesn't let me play my game, et cetera, et cetera. And so how are you feeling when you're watching these games in general? I'm not talking about any individual kid or any individual coach, but just in general, the college game.
Well, up until 4 years ago, I was still coaching, so I
Right.
watched a lot of the evolution of the game and how it's changed. And the players are bigger, stronger, and faster, and certainly a lot more athletic. Um, there is not the attention to well, let me put it this way. You hear a lot of people will now say this guy's really skilled. He can dribble, pass, and shoot it. Well, in high school, I had to be able to do that to make my high school team. You had to be a skilled player.
Right.
But you hear that. You think about it. Think about it now. One of the distinctions that we'll make with NBA players is that guy's really skilled. And not just an athlete. And that's one of the ways, the areas that the game has changed. The 3-point line has spread the court a lot more. And that would have been something. Now, I was never a 3-point shooter, but because of the way I played, I would have loved, playing with Henry Bibby or Larry Hollifield or Jamal Wilkes, guys that could shoot that. It would have opened up the floor for guys that like to slash and get closer to the rim or play in the mid-range, like I did. And so I like that. The thing that I think I don't like the most about the current game is the fact that guys are allowed to dribble the ball and carry the ball.
Yeah.
Because that gives the offense an advantage over the defense that didn't exist before. Now, guys like Tim Hardaway that had the killer crossover were always able to make that move without putting their hand underneath the ball or on the side of it and change directions. But that's probably the thing that bothers me the most. The game has evolved and it changed. And I think to a large degree, most of the changes are fun to watch. The playing above the rim, the fast breaking, I love all that stuff, the pressing, the teams that do it. But they have gotten away. There's more athleticism, probably less fundamentals in today's game, by and large, than maybe during my era.
You really rang the bell with that comment because, I've mentioned I like it to be fluid like a ballet, but the whole part of the thing to me, it's almost, I guess you could say, it's more like an opera. I want drama. To me, good sports has drama. I'm watching guys that if you touch somebody, it's a foul, and yet if you get close to a guy, they're allowing the offensive player with his inside arm to machete you to death, and you're going to get the foul, right? He hits you, and you get the foul. So you can't really guard. You kind of, it's almost like flag football where you can't tackle. You have to try to reach in and grab a flag. So you got to really be good position player and get in front of a guy. And, of course, what's your team defense? Are we pinning sideline? Are we going to do the Wolfpack thing that Tony Bennett likes to do at Virginia? We're jamming in the middle, and you've got to have great help because you cannot guard in this era because they want scoring, because they think scoring leads to more interest, more fans, more TV seats, more money in the next contract, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't guard. You really can't guard. You can sort of fake guarding. It's all about your support now. It's all about your help side helping you to guard a guy.
Right.
That's kind of how I see it.
The rules, a lot of the major rule changes have benefited the offense, and that's true. And it's all trickled down. It starts with the NBA, and then it goes to college, then it goes to high school. And again, the most obvious is if you allow an offensive player who's quick, who's clever, to carry the ball, to literally put his hand on the side of the ball and change directions with it. That's when guarding defense at the point of the ball is really going to be difficult. And that's why, the help then becomes so much more important because it's hard to keep a guy in front of you who's really skilled, who can, manipulate the ball that way. I wish, and you see guys carrying it now because, they learn how to dribble that way. There's no defender on them. They're just bringing the ball up the court. And you'll see a kid, the ball will come to rest, and he'll dribble it, come to rest, come dribble it. And this is not even under duress. So, kids are learning how to dribble that way now. Whereas when I learned how to dribble, I had to keep my hand on top of the ball. But it's an exciting game, and the rules have changed to benefit the offense. Teams that still win championships they score a lot of points, but at some point they got to stop the other team from scoring. That's one of the reasons why I like to watch Houston play this year, because they defend. They really can get out and they play good defense.
Yeah. Kelvin Sampson believes in defense.
I'm going to show you that I'm still a homer, because I do believe that Mick Cronin is coaching UCLA in just that way. And they were an outstanding defensive team. Obviously, they lost yesterday with 2 starters out, 2 centers that fouled out. And yet they lose by 2 points to a top 10 basketball team.
Absolutely.
And they were scrapping and doing everything they could to try and win that basketball game. And so I love what Mick Cronin is doing now at UCLA.
Absolutely.
Once again,
defense travels. And if you're going to get into the tournament like he's done and go deep in it, you got to figure out ways to stop the other team. He got some guys that can score.
Coach, can't we get both? Can't we get where your teams that you played on at UCLA basically, for the most part, had a good possession, got a good look almost every time down the floor, probably 90% of the time, and who knows, maybe that's conservative actually. And then you combine that with how Coach Cronin is playing defense, and oh man, now you got the perfect combination as far as being able to be consistent, as far as being right there with anybody, anytime. It just seems like there's so many free possessions that on offense, teams are just giving away possessions. And not because it's a quick shot. It can be a great shot. You can come over half court and get a great shot in 3 or 4 clicks. I'm not saying that. But, looking at matchups, looking at maybe guys in foul trouble in the other team you'd like to get out of the game, looking at what's working, looking at, we're down 4 with 4 minutes. We don't need to take a 27-footer right away. We got time. All those things. It's like if you had better control on offense, wow. And then, of course, you're on top. If you're on top, you control the tempo and you control the subbing and you control the strategy.
Well, here's the difference between, the way we played and the way the modern game is. You got a shot clock now. And so that speeds up possessions. Had we had a shot clock back in Kareem's era, then USC would not have ever beaten UCLA by running a stall.
True.
Because they would have had to, you have to play. And because now the game is divided up into those, 24-second segments like in the pros, or, the 30 seconds or 35 seconds, because the game is now chopped up into those segments, each one of those segments then becomes that ballet. You can either shoot it early in that ballet or later in the ballet. Tony Bennett's teams, the great Virginia teams that he had guys that could finish late in shot clocks. So even though, the games were low scoring, it's because they minimized possessions. They wouldn't shoot it quick unless they had a layup. So now they're milking that shot clock all the way down to the end. They got players that can create on their own, and they're scoring late in the shot clock. And now you've got games in the 40s and 50s. So the shot clock has changed the way the game is coached and the way it's approached.
I like the shot clock. I missed the 5-second violation. On the amateur level, I like seeing the ball moved more. And now, now that you don't have to worry, again, an anti-defensive thing. So, why are we penalizing? We're not penalizing, but why are we not rewarding the guy that's frustrating the guy with the ball who's holding it forever, either can't go anywhere, whatever. And, basketball is about motion and movement. So we've got no movement while one guy is either dribbling it 19 times in a square, going nowhere, or he's holding it forever looking to do something. I really missed that part of it for the college basketball level.
Yeah, well, the clock was instituted so people wouldn't hold the ball. We played in South Bend my junior year, and one of the Notre Dame players, Digger had the guy that Bill was guarding their center either hold the ball out by half court, or Bill went out there, he would dribble it around, for 2 or 3 minutes at a time.
That was Shoemate, right?
Not Shoemate.
Not Shoemate?
This was no. Shoemate came.
Shoemate
later.
was earlier. Shoemate was later. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Shoemate was on the team that ended the streak. This was
right.
Shoemate might have been a sophomore. I get my games confused, but that was actually one of the strategies. This game was on national television And if Bill didn't go out and guard the guy, he literally stood there with the ball underneath his arm. And so there was a need to let teams play. I would have been now see that shot clock would not have affected the teams that I played on, because we played up tempo. We pressed, and we pressed so teams couldn't hold the ball against us. But I would have liked to have played with the shot clock, because a lot of the games, for us defensively got boring because the other team would hold the ball.
Dick Enberg coined a term. I think he called it like 9 o'clock lightning. And so you guys would be up at the half by anywhere from 10, 12, 13 points maybe. And then about 5 minutes into the second half, the game was over. And so he called it like 9 o'clock lightning. So this is a question for you during your time playing. I don't see Coach Wooden coming in and giving the Newt Rockne thing at halftime. So was there ever anything said at the half that was about we got to play harder, or was it just strategy, or what have you? What was going on? What was happening? What was happening at halftime in the locker room?
You got to go back and look at the scores of the games that I played in, and I don't want to come across as a braggart, because that was not anything that Coach Wooden would do or liked us to do. But I remember getting interviewed my senior year. I was the captain of the team, and we were well into the Pac-8 at that time. And so I'm getting interviewed by a writer. And about 3/4 of the way through the interview, the writer looks at me and he goes, Larry, you don't know who you guys are playing this weekend, do you? And my response to that was, no, I don't, but I know they do. And that had a lot to do with our preparation. Coach spent more time on getting us prepared to play our game than he did on worrying about what the other team was going to do. So at halftime, what Coach would often talk about was what we were doing or what we weren't doing. It had very little to do with what the other team was maybe doing against us. I'll tell you a real quick story. My junior year, we're playing in the national championship game against Florida State, and we're pressing them 2-2-1 press. We'd score and get right in the press. Well, most teams would break the press and then set up their offense, or they turn it over, and we hit them with a 6-8 point Bruin blitz, and kind of put the game out of reach. But Florida State would not only attack the press, but the 2-2-1 is vulnerable in the corners. So they would break the press and kick it to the corners. They had a couple of guys that would stand out there. Again, they would be 3-point shots now. They weren't then. But those guys made those shots. And so very uncharacteristic of Coach Wooden, he took us out of the press and we just played half-court defense. Now, we put the press back on later, but he would make adjustments like that. But there was, at least during my era, there was no, halftime Newt Rockne, we're not playing hard. There weren't any of those kinds of speeches, because by and large we were playing hard. There might have been some things that we needed to look more at. The redhead throwing into him more. He ain't missing any shots.
Yeah, I mean,
or that smooth as silk guy. Make sure you look for him and make sure he's getting the shots. But no, we at least during my era, there were no Newt Rockne speeches before the game or at halftime.
Now I can tell you love coaching from your bio. I mean, I don't think you had to coach. I think you loved to coach. But what was interesting to me, you had a 1-year stint with Golden State. And then after that, you were apparently coaching the Kuwaiti national team, and you went to Rhode Island as well, and you became a head coach again at Loyola Chicago. Now, you probably had an opportunity to maybe keep coaching in the NBA. I don't know what happened at Golden State that year. Maybe there was turnover, maybe there wasn't. But my guess is that you said, you know what, I gave this a shot, and I really like working with the college kids, with the young people, where I can have some influence in their lives and also have I'm actually more of a teacher coach at that level than this pro thing. Am I right? Or great observation.
The year I spent with the Warriors, Don Nelson was the coach and general manager, and you talk about a blessing. I've had the privilege of working with some of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. Larry Brown, he's a Hall of Famer. Don Nelson, one of the most innovative coaches that you'll ever see. And we had a great team that year. Mitch Richmond, Tim Hardaway, Chris Mullen. We won the first round. We actually beat Larry Brown, who was coaching San Antonio. We beat them in the first round. And then we lost in the second round of the playoffs to the Magic Johnson-led Lakers. And that was Magic's last full year before he contracted the AIDS virus. But I loved the NBA was pure basketball. There was no recruiting. There was no class. There was no study hall. It was just pure basketball. And I loved it. I learned so much. But my niche, like you so eloquently stated, my niche was with college kids where you could still teach them to some degree, train them, change some things. By the time you got them in the pros, I mean, these were the best of the best. And so changing the way a guy did some things, that really wasn't going to happen. But my niche was at the college level. And although I learned a great deal and I loved my experience with the Warriors, I knew that I was going to be better suited, working with college age kids.
And then, of course, I need to mention for everybody that you were inducted into the UCLA Athletics Hall of Fame in 2018, and that had to be a special moment.
It really was. I look back at the guy that wanted to go to UCLA and watch them play a game on national television in Denver, Colorado. And when I watched that game of the century, I was yet to be a starter on the varsity. When I announced to my parents that I was going to become a Bruin and get to UCLA. And as unlikely a story as that was, that it all turned out happening, 50 years later, I went from a guy that, coveted a scholarship to play at UCLA to a guy who was going into the UCLA Hall of Fame. That was that's the highest sports honor I'll ever receive. And to this day, I giggle about it because I just remember being that kid, as a sophomore in high school that never told his parents that he was playing basketball because he was the last man on his sophomore team. And when I was standing at that podium saying that to the audience, that I'd come a long way from the elementary school that I used to shoot hoops at to that podium. It was a life's journey for me, and a very proud moment.
Had to be, you had to feel some emotions at that point.
Every emotion you can imagine.
And I would say, having watched you, although didn't know you, I thought of you on a team that had team players. I mean, every Bruin team I saw, you were like just about the ultimate team player. But also, people don't know that when I looked at your bio at the time, you were still, even being a team player, even maybe being, there were basically more like two options and everybody else, scored around double figures. But still, at one point, you were still the number 28 scorer in UCLA history, even not being able to do your thing, let's say. But I think you would probably tell the audience that it was worth it when you look at the friendships, the relationships, the experiences that you had, the winning that you had, and also, as you know, Coach, it's, you did something, but also in life, it's often who you know, not so much what you know. And so that association with UCLA basketball, it was also a wonderful byproduct of all that sacrifice that you
changed my life.
Yeah.
Changed my life forever. And if you ask me, would you rather have gone to Colorado and averaged 18 a game? I would say I'd rather have gone to UCLA and been 89-1.
Yeah. They could never take that away from you. You've got the ultimate comeback. Anybody says anything, all you have to say is 89-1. Don't even explain it. That's
I'll
it.
Take that. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Indeed. I'll take that.
Hey, well, I just want to let you know we're going to wrap this up right here. I think again, and I'll let Nick speak for himself. I really enjoyed talking with you. You would be welcome to come back anytime on the show, and we could talk about anything else as well. And so I'll let Nick, say his.
No, it was just tremendous to have the opportunity to speak with you, to to hear the stories growing up in Los Angeles, as I stated before, and witnessing what I witnessed, and then to be able to talk to again one of my heroes.
Thank you.
It's been tremendous, and so I thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, and even the stuff we couldn't talk about was fun. Yeah. No, you were good about pretty much everything, and I certainly. This is not TMZ. We're not trying to do that anyways. I don't want to know who was chasing what, who was doing what. That's not what this is about. So I believe me, we got all the blood out of the turnip with you. You were great. You were great.
Yeah. That's like any family. You're there are certain parts of your family that are public knowledge. Everybody should know. And I wrote a book, so there's a lot more of me that I talked about. But my days of playing at UCLA for Coach Wooden were, it's like Camelot. Nobody will ever do that again. And it's kind of neat knowing that you were part of something that was so special. It will never be duplicated again.
And a big part. Definitely a big part. As you and I had talked, and we didn't get into it then, and we don't have time now, but I remembered you being chosen to guard Ernie DiGregorio, and you had to shut down other guys, and maybe kids today would look at that and say, so he had to be the defensive stopper. Well, you did more than that, but that was the confidence Coach had in you that you were the guy that he was going to put in the pressure cooker, in the spotlight, that this was important enough that you had to be that guy. So yeah, I mean, you were a major part of that whole thing, and just what a marvelous journey for a young kid who was ready to quit basketball as a sophomore in Colorado.
A couple of years before
right?
that.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? I mean, yes. I know you thought about it, but not that much, because you're living your life, right? I mean, you're just doing it, but it's like when you hear that, it's like, wow, what a leap, right? What a leap. So God bless you. So I'm going to sign off now. I just want everybody to know we've been talking with Larry Farmer, former UCLA great. Coach has written a book, Role of a Lifetime, Larry Farmer and the UCLA Bruins. He himself wrote it with Tracy Dodds, has a foreword by Bill Walton and afterward by Jamal Wilkes. A couple of good names there. List price of $27.95. It came out February 23rd, published by Santa Monica Press, and you can find it in hardcover on Amazon and as a Kindle offering. Thank you, Coach.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Coach.
Our pleasure. Take care.
Oh, you too.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another episode of The Captain's Table. Thank you.